What if I told you that the maturity you've always been praised for is actually the source of your deepest suffering? What if the responsible, capable, put-together version of yourself that everyone admires was never your true self at all, but a survival mechanism you created when you were far too young to know what you were sacrificing? What if the exhaustion you feel isn't because you're doing too much, but because you've been performing a role that was never meant for a child? Picture this. You're 7 years old and your parents are fighting again. Instead of crying or asking for comfort, you quietly go to your room, clean it perfectly, and then come out to offer your mother tea. You've learned that being good, being invisible, being helpful makes the chaos stop, at least temporarily. Or maybe you're 10 and your father has just lost his job. Without anyone asking, you start taking care of your younger siblings, making their lunches, helping with homework, becoming a parent before you've finished being a child. Or perhaps you're 12, and your mother tells you everything, her fears, her disappointments, her struggles with your father, and you listen because being her confidant feels like being loved, even though you carry weight no 12-year-old should bear. Have you ever felt like you skipped a part of your life? Like there's a version of you that never got to be carefree, never got to be messy, never got to make mistakes without consequences? Do you look at other adults who seem lighter somehow, who can play and be silly, and wonder what's wrong with you that you can't access that same freedom? Do you feel ancient inside, like you've been carrying responsibilities for decades longer than your actual age? That feeling when someone praises your maturity and instead of pride, you feel a strange grief, a sadness you can't quite name. The pain I'm describing isn't rare. It's epidemic. And for those who lived it, there's often a deep shame attached to even acknowledging the wound. After all, how can you complain about being responsible? How can you grieve something as seemingly positive as growing up? But here's what I want you to understand, and what the philosopher Alan Watts understood with profound clarity. You weren't mature. You were wounded. And the path to healing requires you to see that distinction clearly. Research in developmental psychology has consistently shown that children who take on adult responsibilities too early, a phenomenon psychologists call parentification, experience lasting effects well into adulthood. Studies published in the Journal of Family Psychology have found that parentified children are significantly more likely to experience depression, anxiety, and relationship difficulties as adults. They struggle with boundaries because they never learned they were allowed to have them. They have difficulty identifying their own needs because they spent their formative years attending to everyone else's needs first. But this isn't just about extreme cases of neglect or dysfunction. This pattern emerges whenever a child receives the message, whether spoken or unspoken, that their acceptance in the family depends on being more than a child. The message might come through praise, through need, through crisis, or simply through the absence of anyone else to fill the role. And the child adapts, because that's what children do. They survive. Abraham Maslow, in his hierarchy of needs, placed belonging right after safety. For a child, these two needs are essentially inseparable. A child who doesn't belong doesn't survive. So when belonging becomes conditional on performance, on maturity, on taking care of others, the child will perform. They will become mature. They will take care of others, and they will lose themselves in the process. This is precisely what Alan Watts spent his life illuminating, not through clinical research, but through philosophical insight that cuts to the heart of human suffering. Watts, the British philosopher who brought Eastern wisdom to Western audiences in the mid-20th century, understood something crucial about the human condition. We suffer not because life is inherently painful, but because we are taught to be at war with ourselves. Watts was born in 1915 in England and later moved to the United States, where he became one of the most influential interpreters of Zen Buddhism, Taoism, and Hindu philosophy for Western audiences. But Watts wasn't just an academic. He was someone who understood suffering from the inside. His own childhood was marked by loneliness and the pressure to conform to expectations that didn't fit who he truly was. Perhaps this is why his teachings resonate so deeply with those who were forced to grow up too soon. He knew what it meant to perform a self that wasn't his own. At the core of Watts's philosophy is a radical insight. The self you think you are, the self that tries so hard, that worries so much, that carries everyone's burdens, that self is not your true nature. It's a construction, a role, a performance. And the tragedy is that most people go their entire lives defending and maintaining this constructed self without ever questioning whether it's real. For those who were forced into premature maturity, this insight is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it means the exhausted, overburdened self you've been carrying isn't who you actually are. Terrifying because if that's not who you are, then who are you? And if you stop performing that role, will anyone still love you? This is the heart of the wound. The child who grows up too fast doesn't just take on adult responsibilities. They internalize a fundamental belief about their worth. I am only valuable when I am useful. I am only lovable when I am needed. I am only safe when I am taking care of everyone else. And this belief doesn't disappear when you become an adult. It runs underground, shaping every relationship, every career choice, every moment of rest that feels somehow wrong, somehow selfish. Watts would say that this is a case of mistaking the map for the territory. The responsible, capable, mature persona is a map, a useful tool for navigating certain situations. But it was never meant to be the territory itself. The territory is something far more vast, far more mysterious, far more alive than any role could contain. I want to pause here for a moment, because I know that what we're discussing isn't just theoretical for you. Right now, you might be recognizing patterns you've lived with for years, patterns that have been so normalized you didn't even see them as patterns. You just thought this was who you were. When was the moment you first realized that your maturity wasn't a gift, but a burden? That moment when you understood that you had been carrying weight that was never yours to carry? Maybe it was when you saw other children playing freely while you worried about adult problems. Maybe it was much later, when you realized you didn't know how to relax, how to play, how to just be without producing something of value. If you're comfortable, share in the comments. I first felt the weight of growing up too fast when your experience, your specific moment of recognition, might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Every time we share our stories, we break the isolation that keeps these wounds hidden and shameful. And if you're not ready to share, that's completely okay. Just know that as we continue, I'm speaking directly to your experience, not to some abstract concept, but to the specific exhaustion and grief that lives in your body. Watts developed his understanding of human suffering through decades of study, teaching, and his own lived experience. He saw that Western culture in particular creates what he called a hostile relationship with oneself. We are taught to improve ourselves, to overcome our weaknesses, to become better versions of who we are. But this entire project, Watts argued, is based on a fundamental error. It assumes the self that needs improving is the real self, when in fact it's just a social construct, a collection of habits and beliefs we've accumulated through conditioning. For the child who was forced to grow up, this conditioning was especially intense. They didn't just receive the normal social programming. They received programming that said their very survival depended on being more than they were, on transcending their childhood needs, on becoming a miniature adult. And they succeeded at the cost of their authentic self. The prevailing theories of Watts's time, whether Freudian psychoanalysis or behaviorist psychology, tended to focus on adjusting the individual to society. The goal was to become a well-functioning member of the social order. But Watts questioned the social order itself. He asked, what if the society we're trying to adjust to is itself sick? What if the values we're internalizing, productivity, usefulness, constant improvement, are themselves the source of our suffering? This question is especially relevant for those who were parentified. They didn't just internalize their family's dysfunction. They often internalized the broader cultural message that worth equals productivity, that rest is laziness, that needing help is weakness. They became, in many ways, the ideal citizens of a society that values output over presence, doing over being. In contemporary life, this pattern shows up everywhere. It shows up in the person who cannot take a vacation without checking email constantly, who feels guilty for taking a sick day even when genuinely ill. It shows up in relationships where one partner is always the caretaker, always the responsible one, always the adult, and feels unloved precisely because they've made themselves so indispensable. It shows up in parenting, where the formerly parentified child now struggles to let their own children struggle, to let them fail, to let them be children, because they never got to be one themselves. But perhaps most painfully, it shows up in the relationship with oneself. The person who grew up too fast often becomes their own harshest critic, their own relentless taskmaster. They don't need external pressure to overwork, overfunction, overgive. They've internalized the pressure so completely that it feels like their own voice, their own desires, their own standards. And this is the deepest tragedy, because the prison has become invisible. Understanding why this pattern is so persistent requires understanding how the human mind works. We are, as Watts often pointed out, creatures of habit. Our brains evolved to conserve energy by automating repeated behaviors. This is useful for things like walking or driving, but it becomes problematic when applied to psychological patterns. When a child learns that their safety depends on being responsible, that learning gets encoded deeply in the nervous system. It becomes automatic, below conscious awareness. The adult who was that child doesn't choose to be hypervigilant about others' needs. They don't decide to feel guilty when resting. These responses happen automatically, before thought can intervene. This is why simple advice like just relax or you need to take care of yourself feels almost cruel to someone with this history. They can't just relax. Their nervous system doesn't believe it's safe to relax. It learned, very early, that relaxation was dangerous, that letting their guard down meant chaos, conflict, abandonment, and that learning doesn't disappear just because intellectually they know better. Watts understood this deeply. He knew that insight alone wasn't enough. You could understand perfectly that your suffering came from mistaking a role for your identity and still not be able to stop suffering. This is because the pattern isn't just mental, it's embodied. It lives in your muscles, your breath, your gut. It is the constant low-level tension that you've carried so long you don't even notice it anymore. How do you know if this pattern is operating in your life? There are several signs that point to the wound of premature maturity. You might recognize yourself in some or all of these. First, you feel exhausted but cannot rest. Not just physically tired, but a bone-deep weariness that sleep doesn't fix. And when you try to rest, you feel anxious, guilty, or depressed rather than refreshed. Second, you have difficulty identifying what you want. When asked what you need or desire, your mind goes blank or immediately shifts to what others need. You've spent so long attending to everyone else that your own wants have become invisible to you. Third, you are the designated responsible one in every group. At work, in friendships, in your family of origin, you're the one people turn to when things need to get done. This feels both like a burden and like your only source of value. Fourth, you struggle with receiving. Compliments make you uncomfortable. Gifts feel like obligations. Help feels like pity. You are far more comfortable giving than receiving, because giving is how you earned love. Fifth, you feel like a fraud. Despite your competence and accomplishments, you carry a secret fear that you're not actually capable, that you've just been performing capability, and one day everyone will see through you. Sixth, you experience chronic physical tension. Your shoulders are tight. Your jaw clenches. You hold your breath without realizing it. Your body is perpetually braced for crisis, even when no crisis is present. Seventh, you have a complicated relationship with authority. You might be excessively compliant, having learned that safety comes from pleasing those in power. Or you might be rebellious, having learned that authority figures can't be trusted to take care of you. If you recognize yourself in these patterns, I want you to know something important. This is not your fault. You did what you had to do to survive. The child you were made the best possible adaptation to an impossible situation. That child deserves compassion, not criticism. And the healing begins when you can offer that compassion to yourself. So how do we begin to heal? Watts offers several insights that can serve as practical guidance. The first practice is what might be called stopping, not doing anything about your patterns, not trying to fix or improve yourself, simply stopping and watching. Watts believed that most of our suffering comes from the attempt to change ourselves, which just creates more conflict. Instead, he suggested simply observing without judgment, without agenda. Watch how the pattern of over-responsibility operates in you. Don't try to stop it. Just watch. See how it arises in response to certain triggers. See how it feels in your body. See the thoughts that accompany it. This kind of watching has a transformative power all its own. The second practice is deliberately doing nothing of value. This is especially difficult for those who were forced into early maturity because their entire sense of worth is tied to usefulness. So the medicine is to practice uselessness. Spend time doing things that produce nothing, that help no one, that serve no purpose except enjoyment. This might feel almost painful at first. That pain is the old pattern protesting its loss of control. The third practice is what Watts called getting out of your own way. This means noticing how much effort you put into being who you think you should be and experimenting with relaxing that effort. Not becoming irresponsible, but allowing yourself to respond naturally rather than from a pre-programmed role. What would you do right now if you weren't trying to be the responsible one? What would you say? How would you move? What would you let go of? The fourth practice is reconnecting with play. Play is the activity that has no purpose except itself. It's what children do naturally until it's trained out of them. For the person who grew up too fast, play may feel foreign, pointless, even frightening. But it's essential medicine. Find something you enjoy that produces nothing useful. Do it regularly. Let yourself be bad at it. Let yourself be silly. This is not frivolous. This is reclaiming what was stolen. Beyond these practical steps, there are deeper implications to consider. The wound of forced maturity is not just a psychological problem. It's a spiritual one. It speaks to fundamental questions about human worth and the nature of love. Watts often pointed out that Western culture has a particular difficulty with the concept of grace, the idea that we might be valued not for what we do, but simply for what we are. We are taught to earn everything: money, success, love, even salvation. But this earning mentality creates a constant anxiety because there's always more to earn, always a possibility of failing, always someone who has earned more. The child who was forced to grow up learned this lesson in the most intimate way possible. In their own family, love had to be earned through performance. And they've been performing ever since, exhausted but unable to stop, because to stop feels like death. The spiritual dimension of healing involves questioning this entire framework. What if you don't have to earn love? What if you are already, as Watts would say, the very thing you're seeking? What if the frantic activity of the false self is actually preventing you from experiencing the love that's already present? This is not easily believed. The patterns of a lifetime resist such radical revision, but it can be tasted briefly in moments of true rest. In those rare moments when you stop performing and simply are, there's often a quality of relief, of homecoming, that points to a different possibility. The practice is to cultivate those moments, not through effort, but through allowing. Your challenge for the coming week is simple but not easy. Choose one area of your life where you are chronically over-responsible. It might be at work, in your family, in a friendship, and practice doing slightly less. Not abandoning your responsibilities, but relaxing your grip slightly. Notice what feelings arise. Notice the fear, the guilt, the certainty that everything will fall apart. And just watch. Don't act on those feelings. Just watch and wonder. Is this really true? Must I carry all this? What would happen if I didn't? This is difficult work, but it's the work of reclaiming your life from a pattern that was imposed on you when you were too young to choose. You didn't choose to grow up too fast. But you can choose now to begin growing down, to reclaim the childhood you were denied, not by becoming irresponsible, but by expanding your sense of who you are beyond the role of the responsible one. If you've ever felt trapped by your own competence, if you've ever felt exhausted by the very maturity that everyone praises, you're not alone on this journey. This channel is a space where we explore these hidden wounds and offer real paths toward healing. By subscribing, you're joining others who have recognized that something was taken from them too early and who are committed to reclaiming it. Each week, we explore another dimension of this journey, drawing on the wisdom of thinkers like Alan Watts, who understood that our suffering is not a personal failing but a cultural inheritance, and that healing is possible when we see clearly what was done to us and who we really are beneath all the conditioning. I know how isolating it can feel when you're struggling with patterns no one else seems to understand, when everyone praises the very thing that's killing you inside. Subscribe so we can continue this exploration together. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. If something in today's discussion resonated with you, that's not coincidence, it's recognition. Your psyche has been waiting for permission to acknowledge this wound, and now you have that permission. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's discover together what becomes possible when you stop performing maturity and start living authentically. Share in the comments one moment when you realized your maturity was more burden than gift. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And until next time, remember, the self that's exhausted from carrying everyone else's burdens is not your true self. Beneath the performance, there's something that never had to earn its place in the world. That's what we're here to discover.